This was the first look at Caleb Ewan's climbing legs before a Hilly World Championships later this year, plus some gamesmanship between an unhappy Bagioli and Santiago Buitrago. This was stage 2 of the Saudi Tour. Ewan obviously cleaned up the sprint yesterday. He was in the leader's jersey. This is 163 Ks though, with a 1600 meter, 7.5% hill at the end. And the question was, would Ewan be able to limit his losses? Probably not win. This looked too hard for the sprinters, but how much time would he lose in advance of a sprint stage tomorrow? Breakaway went again, and Lotto were the team that took it upon themselves to control a lot of it for Caleb Ewan, at least what we saw when the footage kicked in at about 35 kilometers to go. Quickstep, you see, lined up with 7 men riding for Andrea Bagioli on this stage. They look good there. They went missing at the end of this stage, to be honest. Bagioli, we don't know how banged up he was after the crash yesterday, but he took to the start line today and was still mixing it up in this finale. But yeah, I thought Ballerini and Seneschal would be able to control the lower slopes of a climb like this, but it was pretty steep at the start. In the run-in, some furtive attacks for people trying to get away, but still all the big teams like Lotto controlling. And yep, it was going to be a big group arriving at the base for the watts per kilo test, and you can see the climb just starting there. And yeah, it was 500, the last 500 meters really leveled off. The difference was to be made early, and Martin Lass, who's in the points jersey, came second in the sprint yesterday for Bora Hansgrohe. He started to get dropped early. And Santiago Buitrago, the young Colombian on Bahrain victorious, you see him, he kind of looks like Pello Bilbao. He wasn't even in good position into the base. He wasn't at the front of the group where Ewan is, moving up the side of the peloton. Next thing we know, cuts to the moto at the back, everybody's getting dropped, and he was allowed to just slide off the front of the group without getting out of the saddle just about. Fred Wright had been at the front, and so he just goes on the front, and here's the big problems for Quickstep. I think that's that rider, and forgive me, I'm still getting used to everyone's new jerseys. They were not able to really pull this back for Bagioli, who also, no idea what his positioning was like at the base of this. Bahrain, I guess having Fred right at the front was good, but yeah, Buitrago incredibly strong to move up. Daniel Oss, who I mentioned yesterday, the big Italian, he joined Buitrago and then took it upon himself to pace him for a lot of the steeper section of this climb. And there was some people chasing behind a little bit. I still couldn't see Bagioli in the front 6 or 7 riders at this point, and it's going to level off. As this camera will pan around again, it gradually does. You see Oss picking up speed, and what a man to pace you for Buitrago. Probably like a 20 kilo weight difference there. Lotto doing a good job actually for Caleb Ewan. Andrea Bagioli starts to launch on the right-hand side, and his attack was completely different to Buitrago's. Bagioli tries to, doesn't have to, but he takes it upon himself to attack across this gap. Lotto don't really react to him. They're just trying to ride a steady pace for Ewan, which is perfect for him. Bagioli attacks across, whereas Buitrago literally just slid off the front. No one really did anything for 5 to 7 seconds, and the gap wasn't too big. And as that Lotto rider pulls off, which I think is Jasper de Boist, it's then Maxim van Gils pacing on the front, who's sort of trying to ride for his own GC at this race as well. Ewan's in 4th wheel, Oss gets dropped, and now Bagioli starts to pace for Buitrago. So Buitrago's been able to slide off the front, even though he did start in bad position at the base of the climb. Oss bridged to him, Oss paced him whilst Bagioli was sitting in the group behind. Bagioli's now pacing Buitrago, and you just saw that crest. Like visually, you can see that the gradient lessens off in the last 500 meters, and since de Boist pulled off, that gap has expanded massively, and Van Gils, instead of pacing all out, seems to be more marking moves now 3rd wheel for Lotto Soudal. And I mean, this isn't probably a stage for Caleb Ewan anyway. And so one thing we'll never know is how much did the crash yesterday affect Andrea Bagioli. I mean, he looked quite good today, being able to attack across. It looked like he was in bad position at the start of the climb, and then Quickstep didn't really have many people to bring it back. And then he got finessed hard by Santiago Buitrago. Buitrago played this climb absolutely perfectly. He's at this point in the race without a professional win, despite a strong back end of the year in 2021. And I feel like Bagioli might have underestimated him a little bit as well. Not now when they're going into the sprint in the last 300 meters, but when it was still steep, Bagioli just came past them and just thought he could maybe drop him off the wheel. But when Buitrago kicks with 250 meters to go, Bagioli can't even get to his wheel. When the camera angle cuts back, you see pretty good speed in this shallow uphill gradient for Santiago Buitrago. Came 8th or something. He did well in Burgos last year. He came 3rd in Circuito de Getxo, a one-day race, on a punchy finish behind Giacomo Nizzolo, and here takes his first professional victory ahead of the very highly touted, including by myself, Andrea Bagioli, who is no slouch in an uphill finish. But I'm keen to see what becomes of Santiago Buitrago this year. In his early 20s, the Colombian, he doesn't come with the same hype as a lot of other riders, of course, like Higuita and co. He doesn't have the wins of Higuita and Sosa yet, but I think he's developing into a really, really strong rider. Keen to see him at races like the Tour of the Alps and perhaps the Giro d'Italia this year, just to see what he can do, rather than he's been used as a domestique sometimes on flat stages like in the Dauphiné last year, which doesn't really suit like a sub 60 kilo guy like him. But great win for him ahead of Bagioli. He also goes into the leader's jersey 7 seconds ahead of Ewan because he gapped him by 7 seconds. And Buitrago is looking pretty good for GC in this race because Bagioli lost all that time, 20 minutes yesterday. And so who's it going to be that can drop Buitrago or put time into him on stage 4? Like Rui Costa or Van Hills are probably the main candidates. But tomorrow's stage shouldn't affect the GC too much. 181 Ks from Taima Harajuel to Alula Old Town. It's a sprint stage, although it has a slight uphill drag at the end, but this will just be round 2 of seeing Caleb Ewan's Lotto Soudal lead-out train in action, and really want to see whether Bike Exchange can get it right for Dylan Groenewegen, who didn't come in the top 10 in the first stage. You'd be expecting he's probably the second best sprinter here. It is a slight uphill drag. That suits Ewan a lot. He's the man to beat, and if he does win, I think he goes back into the leader's jersey by a couple of seconds ahead of Buitrago, but I'd be expecting him to lose that on stage 4. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Big congrats to Buitrago, and I'll see you with the stage 3 highlights tomorrow. Ciao.